I'm Tim Haynes, Senior Director for Communications here at Research America. And it's my privilege to introduce our next panel, Novel Clinical Trial Design, Paving the Way for Innovation. The moderator for this panel is Dr. Harold Al Paz, Executive Vice President for Health Sciences at Stony Brook University and a Research America board member. Joining him on the panel are Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the FDA, and Cyndi Zagieboylo, President and CEO of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and also a Research America board member. The panel will discuss what flexibilities for clinical trial design were included in 21st century cures and where there may still be gaps. Hal, over to you.
Thanks so much. Well, let's start. So Section 3021 of the 21st Century Cures legislation, which passed in 2016, instructed the FDA to issue guidance on incorporating complex, adaptive, and other novel trial designs into proposed clinical trial applications. Peter and then Cyndi, let's just go straight to the heart of the matter. What can we do to accelerate progress and streamline advances?
Well, I can speak specifically about MS and what we can do to streamline advances in MS in particular, and not so much exactly to the legislation. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about the challenges we face in MS. MS is a highly variable disease with a wide range of onset and severity coupled with comorbidities, and this creates complexity when designing and recruiting for clinical trials. The cause of MS continues to be elusive, and the multifactorial genetic predisposition and environmental factors are a big challenge. So it's there are lots of challenges in identifying in making the clinical in speeding clinical trials. But maybe you can speak a little bit more about the specificity of the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea here is to try to use whatever mechanisms we can to help in these situations where we have had challenges with endpoints, moving forward trials, and getting products across the finish line. Now, there are two different pieces here that I think that come together, and they're complementary. There are the challenges with endpoints in clinical trials, and there are the challenges with the underlying diseases we're dealing with. And in some cases, you can't make up for our lack of understanding of the science, of the underlying science, with endpoints alone. But I do think that we need to really work towards a better understanding of what we can do, because in some cases, we've used crude endpoints that have led to failures in trials. I think that's why the legislation wanted us to more rigorously work through this moving forward in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, Peter, we've had discussions during this year's forum on the importance of clinical trials, and they are incredibly important to the work that many researchers do to get new novel therapies, drugs, diagnostics into the patient bedside. But maybe for those of us, for those joining the discussion today, when we talk about novel trial design, what does that mean? And you know, these names are often used interchangeably, such as Bayesian and adaptive designs. You know, for those that are not doing this work on a day-to-day basis, but are familiar with science and why it is so important, maybe you could just give, from the FDA's perspective, a set of definitions and an understanding of these concepts, because everyone knows what a randomized clinical trial is, I suspect. Right. This is quite different.
Right. So that's a really good place to start. So people understand randomized clinical trial. By chance, you flip a coin, you put people into two different arms. One gets the treatment, one gets either some other treatment or a placebo. So novel trial designs, let's start with a simple one. The simplest of them, perhaps, to understand are some of the adaptive designs. And what adaptive simply means is that some component of the trial is altered after the trial starts on the basis of some predefined criteria. And so that may mean something like the size of the trial could be altered after the trial starts. So it could be a conventional randomized trial, but it adapts because after a certain number of people are enrolled, a look is taken at the outcomes. Now that actually, there are some complicated issues about statistical power, et cetera. We won't go into those right now. But what one can then do is, rather than stopping the trial and starting a new trial, one can continue the trial then, but re-baseline essentially the actual number of subjects that you need. So it could be that you originally thought you needed, I'm just going to give examples. Originally, you might have thought you needed 1,000 subjects, but the effect size that you saw was smaller than you expected. And so now you know you need to enroll 2,000. That prevents you from having a wasted clinical trial where you would have gotten to the end, but would have gotten to the endpoint. And by the same token, you could have a much larger effect than you were expecting. And then you might be able to say, okay, after 500 patients, we can stop. And that would allow you to come to conclusion and spend less money and potentially have the advance to patients sooner by having an answer. So that's just one, and there are a whole variety. It can be the sample size, it can be issues even around the endpoints. One can have adaptive designs that focus on one of different endpoints. So there are a variety of ways. It's just basically, there are variations on a theme in some ways of a randomized trial or a traditional trial. But it's not like something completely out from outer space. Neither are Bayesian designs. Bayesian designs are not from outer space either. The whole idea of a Bayesian trial is that each individual that is enrolled in the trial can potentially bring new knowledge to the next person that is enrolled in the trial. And I'm just going to simplify this by saying the whole idea of Bayes is that before anyone has been treated with a drug, there's a chance that the drug will work or it will not work. It's probably and that's just the way it is, right? After somebody has been treated with the drug, if they get better and it looks like it's worked, the chance that the next person is going to have benefit has increased somewhat. Now, maybe you can say it was just a fluke that the first person responded or not. Okay, but it doesn't matter. After you've treated enough people, you can then come to cross some threshold. And that's a simplified way of the a priori and posterior probability that are used. And these Bayesian designs are used actually in a variety of places. Sometimes they're very helpful in early stage trial designs in reducing the number of individuals that one has to enroll before one moves on. And in some cases, they can be used as designs in later stage trials as well. But again, it's not like these are things that are completely foreign. These are well-established statistical designs that hopefully allow us to get there somewhat faster. Again, from my perspective, our goal in development, and it's our goal at FDA, I think it's industry's goal, right, is to get there as fast as we can for patients with medical advances. And if you can get the answer with fewer patients, with more security that you're getting the right answer, that's what you want to do. And so that's what these trial designs are trying to do.
So
maybe
Peter,
Hal,
go ahead.
I was
Cyndi.
going to say, Hal,
Sure.
if we could think about an example in multiple sclerosis, for example, there's the best example of an adaptive design is called the Octopus trial, which is a trial being funded for people who have multiple sclerosis in the UK. And the UK MS Society is funding this event, this trial that we're watching very closely. It's a multi-arm adaptive study that's modeled after some of the things that have been done in oncology. So some of the things that we need to do are very disease, they're going to be disease specific. And this shows some promise, but a key dimension of this study that's occurring again in the UK is that it's being conducted there in the context of their national health system. And it's bringing some infrastructure advantages that would be difficult to replicate in our complex US healthcare setting. And the other aspect, which again is unique to the UK, is that the people are being recruited, who are being recruited with progressive MS, have been taken off all their MS medications, and there are many MS medications that are approved for treatment, and they work for some people, and many people with MS are on these medications. So in the UK, as soon as someone is diagnosed with progressive MS, all the medications are removed. That doesn't happen in the US, or all the disease modifying medications, I should say. And so this is a clinical guidance in the UK that doesn't happen here. So it's an advantage that they're able to have a very controlled setting using their universal healthcare system. So that's one example. I have another one you'd be one that we're more able to do here if you're interested in that as well.
Well, I was going to ask a question maybe before we go on, Cyndi, and that is from the FDA's perspective, Peter. Is speed at the crux, at the heart of the matter? Is that the crux of this question of why we need novel trial design? And if so, are there any downsides to novel trial design as opposed to conventional randomized clinical trials, which clearly are going to take more time?
Unfortunately, it's a little bit like back in the day with people who learned to touch type. It's not just speed, it's accuracy as well. So you're looking for speed and accuracy, and that's what these trial designs are trying to do. Obviously, you'd like to use the smallest number of patients that you can. That's what helps somewhat with the speed. But ultimately, if you have a trial that doesn't get you an accurate answer, that wastes time. So some of these designs are really there to help avoid the mistakes that lead you to answers that might not be correct ones or that might not be robust. I mean, at the end of the day, you want an answer that makes you feel convinced that you have really answered the question and not or like, did this work or not? And so that is part of what these designs are trying to do. So I probably overstressed before, and I apologize. It's not just speed, it's also accuracy.
No, I appreciate that very much. Thank you, Peter. Cyndi, let me go back to you, and I want you to talk about that other study. But before that, in 2019, a study found that a major unanswered question is whether candidate treatments that do not appear to benefit MS patients are truly not effective. I apologize for the double negative in that question. Or whether the benefits are seen in areas that are not currently measured. So what are your thoughts on this issue? I looked at the paper earlier. What do you think novel trial designs, why do you think they're important and needed? And from your perspective, do you think smaller adaptive clinical trials might actually be very helpful here?
Well, the study, the study you mentioned highlights some of the challenges we face with MS, being a very highly variable disease with a wide range of onset and severity, and lots of variables that affect how someone can live their lives, comorbidities, for example. And so clinical detection leads to diagnosis although disease progression is likely occurring prior to noticeable signs. And so there are the challenges we have to do with, although we've made incredible progress in MS treatments, the measures of success has been largely based on physical display of symptoms measured periodically and with MRI images. The physical symptoms are gross measures of mobility and vision, when we know that the disabling symptoms people often face are fatigue, and cognitive fog, for example. So we don't have enough really specific and sensitive measures to measure what matters most to people with MS, to be able to speed those treatments. And the advancement in progressive MS can be quite slow. So it's slow and insidious and just keeps going, and it's very challenging to have to provide a treatment and then wait to watch that effect, to have that effect. So there can be quite a bit of noise in that in the trials, and we could be missing opportunities that are helping people. For instance, and I think the biggest thing though, Hal, is we might be missing opportunities that are helping people with their fatigue and cognition, and not what the things that we measure often to our definitions of success, which has more to do with motor ability, with ability to walk, for example. And so that's where some of the error can happen in MS in particular.
And so can you share a current example of a novel trial and what it may mean for the development of treatments in this disease? I don't know if that's the one you were referencing earlier.
One I could reference is an adaptive design. Could be enhanced by using artificial intelligence to interpret MRIs in progressive MS in particular. So retrospective review of 20 years of MRI and clinical data can help us understand progression and the effectiveness of therapies over time. So we can actually look back and see all the therapies that people have had, what's happened to them over time. And this can help with a significant, and we have one of these trials going on right now, it can help us with added innovations that can enhance adaptive studies in the future. So novel trials challenges in MS we need biomarkers. We need things that are going to predict the disease activity or measure disease activity before the disease produces symptoms in people with MS. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done.
Thank you. And Peter, in your experience, have we seen more innovative trial designs during the pandemic? Were more innovative trial designs adapted? And do you think that those approaches can be used again going forward? What was your experience over the past 2.5 years?
Yeah, let me break that up. I think even before the pandemic, people were starting to move into using more adaptive and Bayesian design trials for kind of our run-of-the-mill trials that are being done. And so I think we were seeing those coming along. So I think over the past few years, we've seen those. During the pandemic, there were a lot of different designs that came along. We saw a few Bayesian designed trials to try to get answers to questions that had come up. Some of them, though, were not necessarily COVID related. Honestly, for COVID, we saw use of a fair amount of real world evidence in various areas, which granted not typical clinical trials, they did provide us with, real world evidence did provide us with some very important information that we would not have been able to get otherwise. I mean, it's clear that real world evidence was able to detect signals with certain treatments that just you couldn't detect with others. And frankly, vaccine effectiveness has been largely monitored with real world effectiveness. So it's another tool that we have. And I think if there was a lesson of the pandemic, it's that, probably when you are in the process of putting together a tool chest, you probably, as you get an electric drill, don't throw out the hand drill. Don't throw out the awl. That basically you want to keep everything in your toolkit, because I think probably the three words that embody a lot of what we found was fit for purpose. And I think a lot of the trial designs that we saw, it really depended on what you were trying to accomplish and getting to a place that it was the best fit for that purpose. So I think that's what we probably need to do moving forward is, and I think that's sometimes hard to do. I know it sounds crazy. Sometimes sponsors in the rush to move forward don't step back and think, what is the best trial design that I can use? What might get me there more accurately and more quickly than the design that I'm actually using? And it's a little bit like ruts in a road. People just go down the same road, the same ruts every time because they're there, rather than taking a new look and saying, maybe I could get there in a more efficient manner by taking a different track.
You know, and one of the things you're saying there, Peter, is just around the things that we look at, like look at all the time, which is in MS, we're looking at mobility rather than the things that matter most to people. So making sure that we understand what a cure means or what improvement means to people who have the disease is critical in terms of designing those trials. And I think that's relatively novel in our day and age, really listening to what people want out of their lives, what their definition of success is, can help us have better trials that lead to therapies that people will continue to take because they're helping them live their best lives.
From a patient perspective, obviously, patients want to see these drugs come to market quicker. And one question that always comes up is it less expensive? Is it less costly to conduct trials in this way than in the more traditional or conventional ways? And therefore, will there be additional drugs that can be studied not only more accurately and faster, but a greater number of drugs that can go through a pipeline of study to see if there's effectiveness? What do you think, Cyndi?
Well, I think it depends on what the disease is and what you're trying to accomplish. I think that whole tool example was good. What are we trying to achieve? And a novel trial design is not necessarily going to be effective in some circumstances where there's too much noise to make it fast, where the comorbidities are really overlaid with what the disease is happening. We haven't been able to sort through some of those things, where we don't have good biomarkers potentially to be able to speed the trial, where we don't have clinical measures that are effective. So there's some additional tools we need to be more effective in speeding every trial.
Thank you. So the FDA has a really great webpage on complex innovative trial design. And maybe, Peter, you could talk about the pilot. What are you learning from the pilot? Are there still gaps in trial design flexibilities? What's the experience to date?
Yeah, no, thanks. So I think by having these conversations, I think first of all, there are a lot of different innovative ideas being brought to us by sponsors. I don't think we've seen the breadth of different designs and different concepts that people can come up with yet. I think each time we have conversations, we learn more at the agency about what is possible. I think that's very important. I think we want to be open-minded to all of the different designs that we're hearing. I think our statisticians are increasingly looking forward to leaning in here. I can't speak about specific programs because that's not something we can actually do. But what I can say is that, in some cases, people have really tried to overcome some of the barriers that otherwise would lead to incredible challenges in coming to answers for either progress. I mean, it's great. Multiple sclerosis is a great example. Problems where you have to try to get an answer to something where the change may be slow over time. So some of these are looking to address these challenges that we have. Some people wonder why we've made. I'm a hematologist oncologist by training. Hematology oncology has been an easier place. I'm not discounting the incredible advances that we've made with clinical trials in hematology oncology, because I have incredible admiration for what's been accomplished there. But it's easier in many ways because the outcomes are very clear often, right? Tumor's there or it's not there. The person's alive or they're dead. or they're alive with cancer, or they're alive without cancer. Those are easy compared to in many neurologic diseases where somebody has a certain level of function, and that level of function can vary from day to day, and you have to find a way to capture that endpoint in a way that you can determine whether an intervention has changed the trajectory. In some cases, these are downward trajectories where you're just trying to stop the downward trajectory. In some cases, you're trying to see if it will lead to an upward trajectory. So I think those are some of what these designs are trying to do, and do so most efficiently. And again, I think, this is a great example of that balance between speed and essentially accuracy, because you need to get the accurate answers here, because you don't want to end up after a trial that goes on for a year or two to find out that, well, the endpoint was not really, what you've done isn't accurate, and you don't have what you need.
Yeah, and I think that I'm a pulmonary and critical care physician, and I lost count of how many clinical trials I was involved in septic shock and ARDS. And I think back in the early days, how I wish we had better tools to do subgroup analysis to look at the impact of a particular agent. And this, to me, is one way to get there, and to get there a lot quicker, and to hopefully find at least some group that would benefit from a novel agent that we would have missed looking at a much larger population, to your point. So we have only a couple of minutes left, and let me just put this in front of both of you. So, Research America is all about partnering, and I guess Cyndi and Peter, how do we partner, and what are the partnerships that need to be made, and to better break down barriers to improve access and the use of novel trial design? I'll give you each a couple of minutes before we wrap up.
Well, I'll say that the partnership or the conversations, I think you just talked about this, Peter, a little bit, the conversations that we have in advance of launching a clinical trial, and with FDA's engagement with in those discussions early is extremely helpful. If we can just determine exactly what we're trying to achieve, what are we going for specifically, if we have that input from people who have the disease, and what their definition of success would be. If we put all that together, then, like Peter said, you have to use the tools that we have to get the answer that we want. But determining what would be success early on is really most important, and that advanced work can't be understated.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, no, I just want to so heartily agree with that. I think understanding from the patient perspective what really matters in disease is probably been one of the, I mean, it's now part of, it's made it into legislation, but right. I mean, it's something that was kind of an aha insight over the past decade, that, you might care most about the heart rate and the blood pressure, but actually the patient cares about, whether they're fatigued or not. So this is really understanding that patient perspective, incorporating that into good trial design, really thinking about the best fit for purpose, working together with patients, with good advisors, and then with the agency in consultation. I think that is the way to essentially have the greatest probability of success moving forward.
That's terrific. Well, we're out of time, but again, Cyndi and Peter, thank you so very much for this conversation about novel trial design. Really appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.